Peggy Fox took a summer job at New Directions in 1975, fully intending to finish her dissertation at the University of Pennsylvania and return to college teaching. But she fell in love with the mission of New Directions, and since her graduate work had focused on modern American and British writers, particularly poets, she felt right at home and stayed for the next 36 years, retiring in 2011 as president and publisher. She worked closely with New Directions founder James Laughlin to publish new scholarly editions of such New Directions deceased giants as William Carlos Williams, Ezra Pound, and H.D. In addition, she edited In a Wide Arc from being Tennessee Williams' last editor and publishing a number of his works posthumously, to introducing dissident Chinese poet Bei Dao to an American audience. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So, you worked with James Laughlin for 20 years?
Yes, I did. I have to qualify that in that when I came to New Directions in 1975, his right-hand man, Robert McGregor, had died the year before, and he was still recovering from that. And he was at that point in his life, he was in the office sporadically. He would come down in the middle of the week, usually 2 or 3 days, and then he would go back to Connecticut. And as time, and then in the 80s, he started what he called a second career of giving lectures in colleges and even teaching a few courses at places like Brown, where he would teach a semester course. So then he came in even less, and then by the time his wife died I think it was 89, and so then after that he came in very, very rarely. So yes, I worked very closely to him, but it was always a kind of at a remove. One of my roles early on was to collect carbons of the letters that anybody in the office had written that week, and send them up to Jay with like maybe reviews of books that had come in, any notes that people had to send to him about anything, or a memo that somebody had written. I would send those up to Jay, and then I would get back an envelope, a stuffed envelope, with what we call Norfolk confetti.
That's where he was, in Norfolk.
In Norfolk, Connecticut was where his home was. He had a reputation, both personally and as a publisher, as being very frugal, shall we say.
Despite coming from a family that had, what, billions, can we say?
Millions.
Certainly millions.
Millions. Yes, they were not in the Bill Gates, but they...
Was the grandfather in the Bill Gates category? Because he competed with Andrew Carnegie, right?
Right. I don't think quite that, but okay. Certainly, mega millions.
Yeah. Okay.
Certainly the grandfather. And Jay, you certainly wouldn't know it from, he had a large rambling, much added to farmhouse in Connecticut, but you wouldn't call it a mansion, I don't think.
But he never got his hands on the money until quite late in life, right?
That's right, so he built New Directions on a shoestring, because he was living on the interest from some capital that his father had given him as a young man, up until his Aunt Lila, his beloved Aunt Lila.
His surrogate, you think his surrogate mom?
I think he was much closer to her than he was to his biological mother, shall we say. And Aunt Lila really shaped him in many ways, and he spent he went to prep school in Connecticut, to Choate, and he would spend all of his vacations with Aunt Lila in Norfolk, which is in the northwestern part of the state.
She really loved him too.
Oh, she really loved him, and she let him know it, and she made him feel very special, and and spurred him on, and backed New Directions when it was first started. But his mother would help too. So I think his mother belatedly decided that her son hadn't turned out so badly, and she kind of tried to make it up to him a little bit.
Okay, but anyway, a bit of a skinflint. That's the reputation.
Bit of a skinflint. So he would take any paper that had only one side used, and he would cut them up into 4 quarters, and he had this stack of sheets. I remember one whole couple of years, they were John Kerry handbills when John Kerry was first running for senator in Massachusetts, and his son was working on the John Kerry campaign. And we had stacks of, you would see a quarter of John Kerry's face, on one side, and then he would write the notes on the other side. And everything would get a response. He would thank somebody for writing a very good letter. He would ask for a box of New Directions envelopes. He would tell me what he wanted for a wide variety of things. And so we called that Norfolk confetti, and I would pass it around, and then I'd send out a new thing, and then so this went on for years and years and years. But that was how we communicated. And of course we, had long phone conversations when necessary.
Did he have, I'm just thinking about the fact that he was a bit of a skinflint, and he didn't have a lot of money to play with New Directions, but I think he must have had access, because of the name of the family, as much as anything to start with anyway. He must have had access to all sorts of people.
Oh, he had tremendous access to, yeah. Between his personal connections and his literary connections, and this went from one of his boyhood friends was John Heinz of the 57 varieties, and that was another Pittsburgh company, and this is the John Heinz who was the father of the senator. Actually, John Heinz is a little bit older than Jay, but when they became adults, they really gravitated together, and they went skiing together a lot. And John Heinz would call and says, I'm heading off for whatever place in Switzerland, my private plane will pick you up at the Hartford airport, in X number of hours, and off they would go. And also, by this time, John Heinz was married to Drew Heinz, who was a great patron of the arts. In fact, she has endowed a literature prize given every year by the American Academy of Arts and Letters for, I guess it's for the best second book of poetry that somebody has written. But it's now the James Laughlin Prize, in his honor. And so he could count on Drew to be, a champion of whatever he was doing. Yeah. But also he introduced Ravi Shankar to this country. Ravi Shankar, when he first came over in the 57, played at Jay, and who was then newly married to Anne Resor, played at their apartment.
So it's like the Beatles being able to attract that kind of...
But I'm just saying, the connections go from business people.
Yeah.
Anne's brother-in-law, Hauge, I think his last name was Eisenhower's Secretary of the Army or Undersecretary. They all...
One degree of separation.
Exactly.
For the whole, establishment?
Yeah, the whole establishment, yes.
Right, right.
But he kept a very low profile. Still to this day, James Laughlin is the great undiscovered literary secret of American literature, because his tentacles go out everywhere, and he has influenced and touched.
Didn't make a big deal out of it.
He didn't make a big deal out of it, and people, the literary people know, and kind of bow in reverence to. But the larger American public simply doesn't know the man existed, but yet he influenced what is taught in colleges, in American literature. He helped shape the whole way literature moved in the 20th century.
When you say that, it reminds me an awful lot of what Ezra Pound did, just in the sense that he had all these tentacles out. It's incredible, the number of people that he influenced.
And Jay was his disciple in a sense, and he's the one who told the story that it was Ezra Pound who told, you're never going to be a poet, and go back and start a publishing company. Maybe you can manage to do that. And
be useful.
Be useful. And the other line was, Jay reported, he says, well, what can I do? He said, maybe it can assassinate Henry Seidel Canby. He said, but I don't think you're smart enough to get away with it. Then Jay reported, he said, well, Pound told him to go do something. He said, maybe you could be a publisher. Maybe you're smart enough to do that. But that was Jay's fabrication, and my husband, Ian McNiven, who wrote a biography of Laughlin, has pretty well, I think, that it's more complicated. You know, that's not exactly
the way. A bit of a caricature, yeah.
A bit of a caricature. But Jay liked to really downplay. I mean, that was part of his shtick, you know, that he just totally downplayed his contribution. Yeah. And it was all Ezra's fault that I did this, you know. But yes, he learned at Ezra's, sitting on the floor beside Ezra's chair, that you know, the writing of so many letters to so many people and keeping in touch. And I forget, it must have been in the late 40s when he started dictating. And all the time that I was there, he was dictating, and he would send the tapes down to be transcribed in New York. And I can do a JL signature better than he could.
What was the signature like? Was it as loopy or?
That's the interesting thing, is that if you look at his letters written when he was a young man, he had beautiful handwriting, really the Palmer method. It was just beautiful handwriting like that, and then it got more tinier and more cramped as
time went by.
And I think partly by the time I knew him, he was taking lithium for his bipolar disorder, which had been diagnosed in the early 70s, and that, I think, had a great effect. And so after that, particularly, his handwriting was smaller and more cramped.
So he sent you a lot of confetti, and you dealt with the confetti.
And I dealt with the confetti.
Cleaned it up and made sure it went in the right direction. How did you progress in the company?
What happened was, I came to New Directions, as you read in that little bio, just as a summer replacement. I was trying to, that was the city that the summer that New York City went bankrupt. I had been teaching as an adjunct at Brooklyn College, and all of a sudden New York had no money. Everybody who didn't have either a union contract or tenure was out on their ear. So I had a friend who was working at New Directions, and I said, is there anything there? And well, you know, people were going on vacation, so they gave me a summer job, saying, don't get any ideas, there aren't any jobs here. Mm-hmm. But by the end of the summer, things had eventuated, as they say. And
you'd made yourself...
No, it really had nothing to do with me. Two people left very, very suddenly, and I was offered a job doing copyrights, contract, foreign rights, things about which I knew absolutely nothing.
But you were working in literature.
I was working in literature, and this is, I think that today's education is getting rather so narrowly focused on preparing you for a job or, you know, professional training of some kind. And the good thing about being an English major is you are adaptable.
Well, I don't know if that's all English majors, but...
Well, if you can write well...
Yeah, and think.
You're generally pretty adaptable. And so I said, I can, you know, copyrights, I'll read the copyright manual, you know. In about 6 months, I was doing all of the things that the person I was replacing had done, but I had half my time left over. So since I did have this academic background, Peter Glassgold, who was then the managing editor, wanted some help with Tennessee Williams. It had been started under Robert McGregor, but it was really Peter who put together the first 5 volumes of the Theater of Tennessee Williams, the ongoing series. Now he was working on a book of poetry by Tennessee ended up being called Androgyne Mon Amour.
In fact, that's what Tennessee Williams and James Laughlin bonded over, was poetry.
Absolutely.
Art Crane.
So anyhow, Peter wanted help with doing this poetry volume, so I stepped in, and then he eventually handed Tennessee over to me because he kind of had enough Tennessee, and so, and I was thrilled to pieces, you know. From that point on, I became Tennessee's editor until his death.
So that was when to when?
So that was about 76 or so, and Tennessee died in 83. Yeah, and that's how Tennessee and they had met, at a party given by Lincoln Kirstein. That was another one of those tentacles. Lincoln Kirstein had founded the New York City Ballet, or co-founded it with George Balanchine, but he was also a literary impresario. And he gave parties.
What does a literary impresario mean?
He puts people together, and particularly young gay writers, because he was, even though he was married.
Bisexual?
Well, no, Jay said to me, it was a marriage of convenience, I believe.
Okay.
And
diplomatic?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, but he had gotten to know Tennessee. He said, to Tennessee, I know this young publisher. He comes to my sometimes. I'll put you together.
Yeah.
Now, here's another example of Jay. Jay told the story of the meeting. He said, so I went to this party, and there I saw this forlorn-looking young man in a torn sweater, sitting up against the wall in the bedroom. And he looked so lonesome, I went over and started talking to him. And then, as you say, they bonded over, they both loved Hart Crane. And the book that Thomas Keith and I just published.
Yeah, it's called The Luck of Friendship, The Letters of Tennessee Williams and James Laughlin.
Yeah.
Published by Norton. That's just out, right?
Just out in March.
March of 2018, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the letters in there that we reference, or I guess I put it in my introduction because it's not between Jay and Tennessee. It's Tennessee writing to his parents a few days before this party is to take place. I'm supposed to meet this publisher of New Directions at this party at Lincoln's, later in the week, and I do hope he likes me. And so this was a setup. I mean, and I'm sure that Kirsten had told to J.L., now there's this young poet. He's a playwright. He's a playwright. He might go someplace. Talk to him. Get to know. So that but Jay, total happenstance. Not on your life. Yeah. But that was their meeting, and so I started to work on the Tennessee things during the next decade.
You were primarily an editor there? And
then I became I was half-time doing businessy type things with the copyrights, contracts, writing contracts, all that kind of thing. And in a small outfit, and New Directions never has had more than, at least in my time, more than 9 or 10 people there.
It's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? So, I mean, the company has got such a grand history and a reputation. It's such a small little office.
Yeah, this is true. This is, you have to understand, this is strictly the editorial office.
Okay.
New Directions books are distributed by W.W. Norton, and they do what I call the higher bookkeeping, i.e. they figure out the royalties and things, and
Norton does that?
They figure them out. And then they would cut the checks on the New Directions account and then send them down, and then for years I would and then I would sign them. So that a lot of things that a normal publisher does in-house aren't done there in the office. Like the book design and everything is freelanced out. The jacket design, and there's a production manager. So it's basically editorial publicity production, and there's always a permissions person who handles the requests to use work in other ways. But yes, it is small, but everybody works extremely hard.
They have to.
Yes, and the one thing I would say is that people tend to come and stay for years. I mean, half of the staff at New Direction, the current staff, has been there for a very, very long time.
Even though the pay's not as good as elsewhere.
Well,
or is it
compared to other publishers, it's not bad. We've done a lot, and in my time there, to really beef up both pay and benefits to really try to make it possible for people to. So when I finally became the president
in 2004?
In 2004. What was I making? What the president of another publishing house that has had the same impact on American literature as New Directions, was I making what the president of that company? No way.
FSG, for example.
Yeah, not on your life. But the entry-level positions at New Directions were better paid than the entry-level positions at FSG. We tended to be more egalitarian. Mm-hmm. We did not have income inequality, at New Directions.
Your Ezra Pound would have approved that.
Ezra Pound would have loved us, as he always did. He always called it New Directions.
New Directions.
But anyhow, when you came to New Directions, you either didn't last very long or you stayed forever. And if you stayed forever, you signed on to the mission.
So what is the mission?
The mission of New Directions was that if...
Was and is?
Was and is. It hasn't changed. We tried to follow what Jay... And you have to go back to the very beginning, mm-hmm. when Jay was...
young and idealistic?
Young and idealistic. He always remained idealistic, but he was maybe less vocal about it. But when he was young and vocal about it, he believed in the revolution of the word. That if you could clean up and reinvigorate what was said, what people read, what literature was, if you could get through the dross and the muck and touch people somehow at their core, you could change the world. You could make people better. You could make everything better. We know this is probably, this is a dream that people have in every age in a way. But if people don't have that dream in every age and stop trying to do that.
Despite the fact that not that many people are reading these days.
Despite the fact that not that many people are reading. But you make that attempt. And first of all, when he started, he was trying to give people like Pound and William Carlos Williams just a place to have their work published. In the middle of the Depression, that wasn't so easy, so he wanted to have a place for really new writing that was experimental in some way, that was trying to make a difference. He wanted a place to publish that. Then he also wanted, because he had a number of different languages and could read in different, in German, in Italian, in French, and he saw that there were writers in those countries people that he wanted to introduce here. So that became a part of the mission, introducing. He saw also that some of the people that he had liked when he was young weren't being published at all. I mean, had been published, were now out of print. So he started a line to reintroduce The Great Gatsby, Faulkner, Light in August, E.M. Forster, Henry James. And of course, as soon as those New Directions started to get some traction, those people... Of course, the original publisher took it right back. I mean, New Directions...
He did all the hard work.
Yeah, he did. He got them reintroduced, made them viable again, and then their stars rose. Believe me, New Directions would dearly love to have The Great Gatsby still on its list.
How long did it have it on its list for?
7 years. That was the length of the license for a reprint license like that was the standard in those days. At least was 7 years.
And did you get to keep everything, or did you have to give some to the holder?
I mean, it was a royalty arrangement.
Right. You got a percentage. You produced the whole thing?
You produced the book, sold it, and you sent a royalty is based on a percentage of what they call the list price. So if a book back then was selling, it was like $2. Those were little hardbacks, so it would be 10%. You'd send 20 cents of each copy sold to the original owner. Usually it was the publishing house, and then they would split that with the author.
Yeah, if they're still alive.
Right, exactly. But anyhow, so that was a part of a mission. But anyhow, it was this multi-pronged in all these different ways, trying to advance literature.
He had such an incredible eye.
Yeah, and the list, and and here was I coming from an academic background where I had, in graduate school, and I had been studying Pound and Williams and other people of that ilk. And
that's so exciting for you.
Yeah,
right?
and I'm saying, I can have a real impact on literature instead of writing dumb academic articles about it.
Right.
And then somewhere into there I said, I'm not going back. No way am I going back to teaching. Even so I stayed. But anyhow, I always said that Jay worked on the principle of seduction. I know he has somewhat of a reputation as a womanizer, and I don't mean seduction in any Me Too kind of sense. I mean, he was able to seduce people to sign on to this vision that he had, this mission.
Kind of evangelist.
Yeah.
For literature, or good literature.
If you were seduced, and I was, then you just said, well, I'm staying.
How did you continue this, not a mission, but it was your responsibility to find great work.
Well,
so how did you do that?
Okay, that was never a responsibility that I undertook.
Okay.
As I said in the little bio, I became the deceased giants specialist.
Oh, okay.
And so I was, with my academic background, I was the one who was...
As the president, though, didn't you have kind of a say in...
when I became president, when I started running the company,
yes.
By that time we had found a wonderful young woman named Barbara Elpler, who's now the president and publisher, and she proved to have an uncanny knack for finding wonderful people.
So let's look at that, because that's what I want to get at with Laughlin and with, what's her name again?
Barbara Elpler. Okay,
so uncanny. What is it that she's got that other people don't have?
Well, I mean, first of all, she's got great literary taste, and this is was part of JL's gift too. Contacts.
Someone says
networks.
To you, I know about this author. You really should read.
I know about this, and a friend of hers is a German journalist who knew that they were publishing this fascinating guy in Germany, W.G. Sebald.
Did you do Austerlitz then?
We did not do Austerlitz. This is the New Direction story. We did Sebald's first 3 in this country. We made a 3-book deal, and then when he started to hit really big,
that's the story of your life.
Random House offered him $500,000 for his next 3 books.
You did a lot of the work.
And Barbara found him. We published him. And I remember walking with Max. He was called Max. With Max, he was in this country to a book event at the Barnes & Noble at Union Square, I guess it was. And Susan Sontag was introducing him. And I said, well, Max, we're really, really sorry that you're not going to be published by New Directions anymore. And he put his arm around me and he looks at me and he says, oh, Peggy, I will always be a New Directions author. Broke my heart. But he was the sweetest man. But he wanted to retire he was teaching in England, and he wanted to retire and be able to write full time. And
can't blame him.
You can't blame him, and there's no way we could come up with $500,000 for his next 3 books.
So wait a minute, was that like just a bonus, and then he still got 10%? Well,
that was an advance
no,
against
I know,
royalties.
But was it against the royalties?
Yes, it was against the royalties, and
so he could have got the same amount with you if he just didn't get the advance.
Right. I mean, if he had,
he just wanted the money up front.
He needed the money, and of course, the sad thing is that within a year or 2, he was dead.
In a car crash, right?
Well, he had a heart attack while he had gone to pick his daughter up at school, and they were driving back, and he had a heart attack at the wheel. So she found Sebald, Roberto Bolaño, same, and this. I think that was Francisco Goldman who told her, "You gotta
check this guy out."
This guy out.
So she was doing
I was doing Deceased Giants, and then this began. She came in mid '80s, so that by around '90 or whatever, she had brought home a couple of things, and I'm saying, give this kid her head, because she's and she's still. I mean, and New Directions today is doing very well, thank you.
What does very well mean?
There for a long time, we were kind of breaking even, and that was JL's model. JL was very happy if New Directions could simply break even, and usually any profit was plowed back into the company. He never took a salary from New Directions ever. And and it was given back in bonuses.
It's almost like a nonprofit, isn't it?
Basically it's run pretty much like a nonprofit.
Yeah. Well, when you consider poetry,
yeah,
you can't really make a profit with poetry, or it's bloody hard.
No, it's very, very hard. Where was I?
He didn't take a salary.
He didn't take a salary, but anyhow, so that they're doing very well. Barbara has done some. I mean, they've done some interesting things.
Yeah, let's get into a few of the books.
Well, this is post my time.
Okay.
Well, we have.
You're still proud of it, though.
I'm very, very proud of it. At JL's death, I'm one of the trustees of the 3. He set up 3 trusts under his will, one of which owns New Directions, and one of which paid for his own books to be published, like his collected poems and the various other. There were several other projects that were in.
He wanted you to do the Tennessee
Although
Williams.
he had struck a, he was so smart. He struck a deal with Norton. Norton published this. That's not New Directions. Norton publishes the.
He just wanted to make sure it was brought out.
He wanted to make sure it was done, and he made a deal with them that they would bring these out. And so this is, I think, the 9th of. There are 8 others,
8 other letters?
The 8 other volumes of letters. One with, Laughlin and Pound, Laughlin and Williams, Laughlin and Rexroth, Laughlin and Henry Miller. Okay, and this is the last. It's only taken me 25 years since you folks asked me, but that's okay.
Still, you must feel good about delivering on your promise.
No, I do.
Yeah.
But Barbara's very canny about, well, what can we do things to make money? So this is a co-production between New Directions and a woman named Christine Bergen. Emily Dickinson, The Gorgeous Nothings. And it's a coffee table book. And it's about all of the little scraps of poetry that Emily Dickinson wrote on the backs of envelopes.
Put in her drawer.
Put it in a drawer, and it's sold like hotcakes.
Isn't that great?
They're transcribed, and there's an interview. There's apparatus that explains what they are. And
I like the way that you've got them transcribed. You've got the little image. Here's the little envelope. So you got the image of the real thing.
And this Christine Bergen has an art gallery, and so she takes care of the production of which is of a kind that New Directions doesn't usually do. This kind of art book. And,
isn't that great?
And so there have been a few of those.
What are you proudest of under your tour of duty?
Okay,
what are you proudest of?
Okay, so I did work with Tennessee Williams during his lifetime on the last few plays that he published while he was alive, and then when he died, I said to myself, the scariest decade for a writer in terms of their long-term reputation is the decade after they die, because if everything just goes out of print and they're forgotten, then they can be dead forever. Unless
some good fairy godmother like New Directions comes along and do what they did with...
So we started out with the collected stories.
Okay, this was what, shortly after he died then?
This is shortly after he died. And
Tennessee Williams collected stories.
And we took... New Directions had published several volumes of his short stories, but there were lots that weren't. So I went through all of those and put them together, and you will notice that this has an introduction by Gore Vidal. Sure, I know Gore Vidal. Right. But Lady Maria St. Just, the one who almost married James Laughlin, became the executor of Tennessee Williams' estate when he died. He had named her in his will. He named her principally because he wanted somebody he could really, really trust to take care of his sister Rose, who was the model for Laura of the Glass Menagerie, who was in an institution in Ossining, New York. And he wanted somebody, and Maria, that kind of thing, she could be... a lot of things. And Maria certainly has her detractors in the world of Tennessee. But taking care of Rose, she did very, very well. But anyhow, so I'm putting this book together, and I say, and she happened to be in New York. She came in the office, and I'm saying, well, Maria, what we really need for this book is somebody to do a really bang-up introduction. And she says, Gore must do it. And I finally figured out she was talking about Gore Vidal. And I said, well, do you know how to get in contact with him? And she says, we'll call him. So we go into my office, she rings up Gore in Rome and basically says, Gore, you will write this introduction. And he says, yes, ma'am. And his only stipulation was that he be allowed to publish it in something like the New York Review of Books, which he did, which gave
so
the
he'd
book
get paid for it.
So
plus,
he would, well, I mean, he got paid for it.
Plus it promoted
it.
It
promoted the book. I mean, he got paid for New Directions. I don't know. He got several $1,000s, which for New Direction was pretty big bucks in those days. But yes, he wanted. But but that really made the book. But you notice that it's an introduction by Gore Vidal, but there's no editor at all, because I put the whole book together, but it was considered not the done thing for an in-house editor to put their name on a New Directions on a book.
It's a bummer.
That was a bummer. I mean, but I mean, we had our standards. We didn't. In those, I think they've changed the policy. But so I started going through my drawer and getting early plays that he wrote when he was a student, before he even became Tennessee, when he was still Thomas Lanier Williams. At the University of Iowa, or for the Mummers in St. Louis. And this was, I think, the first one of that. I called them apprentice plays.
Oh, Vanessa Redgrave forward.
That's another pal of Maria's, So we did those early plays. We did a book of screenplays.
It went into a second printing.
These things. The thing about New Directions is these things stay in print. I mean, we keep them in, we keep them in print. We keep them in print.
Yeah. So Tennessee Williams is a big part of your professional life.
He's a big part of professional life, and also I would have to say he's a big part of New Directions' finances, because he's far and away the best-selling New Directions author.
Right now?
Right now.
Because of all the classes
because of classroom adoptions.
So was Laughlin involved in getting the universities to use New Directions texts?
Well, if you have the only text,
yeah, that helps.
And there was a certain period when we leased the rights for mass market, to like New American Library or whatever. But around this time, we decided that we would bring them back, and that has proved to be very beneficial in terms of just you make more money if you have the only book. So there was a whole Tennessee Williams program, and then I would do things like.
What do you mean I would do?
I would initiate a project and get the scholar. This is two very well-known scholars, Walton Litz and Christopher McGowan, who's probably the dean of American William Carlos Williams scholars right now.
The collected poems.
And they did the collected poems, and they did volumes 1, and then Chris did the volume 2, and Patterson by himself. But in other words, taking old New Directions titles and redoing it in a proper scholarly edition with
footnotes,
variants and footnotes, and just the needed scholarly apparatus. And we did like an HD. We started out with doing a collected poems.
So you're kind of not repurposing, but you're repackaging,
redoing, and then publishing a lot of like HD that hadn't been done for 30 or 40 years. This is one of the last things. Facsimile edition. This is offset from the original edition of Spring and All, which is one of the very early William Carlos Williams.
So it's not that expensive for you to produce then?
No, I mean it was. We took the New York Public Library has a rare edition, a rare copy of that original small booklet that he did, and we were able to offset from them, and so we do things like that. But then, as I took over as president and publisher, I turned most of the Tennessee Williams over to the young man who I brought on to help with Tennessee Williams stuff in the late 80s, Thomas Keith. You know, he started helping me prepare different texts for publication. But then he's done about 4 volumes of these unpublished one-act plays, or short plays. Some of them are not purely one-act.
So again, a big market would be the education market.
Education market, but also, you know, part of New Direction's mission that Jay very much started was when you have an author, you do all of that author, and particularly with Tennessee,
you really commit yourself.
You commit and so and in the book of letters, there's a lot about, you know, they're talking about plays and you know, and publishing Streetcar and publishing Cat and this and that and Rose Tattoo. There's a wonderful letter about the Rose Tattoo. But also he's encouraging Tennessee as a poet, because he really did love his poetry, and he's encouraging him as a story writer, you know.
Did you ever get Glass Menagerie back from, it was Bennett Cerf?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay.
What happened was, of course, you know, they insisted that Bennett Cerf had given Tennessee $100 for an option on his next full-length work before he had even written a full-length work. And so he let several projects like the failed Battle of Angels go by, but then when Glass Menagerie was a hit, he said, I get that. And Jay in Tennessee had been making plans for the New Directions edition, and Jay was very hurt, but he realized it wasn't Tennessee's doing. And so, of course, Random House published it, had it for about a year or so, and then, of course, they let it go out of print, because plays notoriously, you know, after the play is off Broadway, then unless they become part of the canon, they just die as published books. And so then immediately, and it was part of that, it became one of those new classics, which was the same series that Jay had that reintroduced The Great Gatsby, so it was part of that. I know that you are really interested in book design and everything, and a great number of the Tennessee Williams plays had Alvin Lustig covers, and there's a lot in the Luck of Friendship about the covers and about Lustig and about, you know, talking about this and that and the appearance of the books.
Speaking of design, before I forget, can you tell me a bit about the logo, the New Directions logo? Do you know anything about it?
Oh, yes. The colophon is a man kneeling next to a horse. Jay called it the centaur. It is not a centaur. You can see the horse's head, you can see the man's head. It is not a centaur, but he always called it the centaur. And I once said, but it's not a centaur, Jay. And he says, it is if I want it to be. Thank you very much. But anyhow, that came from a drawing that Jay was given by Ezra Pound. The artist Heinz Hengis was a Jewish artist, wandered into Rapallo, where Pound was then living in Italy.
And of course, Pound is supposed to be an anti-Semitic.
Oh, yeah, right. Starving. Pound befriended him, found, you know, he was an artist, found him a place to sleep, got him a piece of marble, and because he was a sculptor, basically, and he did something, and the wife that had a Fiat bought this piece of sculpture, and then
Fiat, the car manufacturer.
Yeah, and then he was off and running. But anyhow, Pound gave the sketch to Jay, and Jay liked it so much that he used it as the colophon.
Very good. That's a nice bit of backstory there.
Yes.
So what do you think your legacy from being with the company is?
Well, I think that I was a steadying hand.
In the storm at sea.
In the storm at sea.
Because I'm referencing a note that Jay gave to you.
I think Barbara, who's now the head, is a much better certainly at finding new authors, and she has certainly she's out there, like 7 nights a week, meeting authors and talking to people and flying all over the globe, doing things to promoting, and I could never compete with her in that. But I kind of did a different half, of making sure that the business side was sound.
I was going to say, it sounds like Jay's interest in women. He wants the excitement, but he also wants someone to organize.
Right.
So you've covered it off there.
Yeah. He sent to me, this is one of his little pieces of Norfolk confetti. You can see what Norfolk confetti actually looked like.
It's about a 3x4.
Yeah, sort of postcard size.
Postcard, yeah.
And he says, Peggy, I hope you're as happy with G's, that's Griselda Oanessian, who was then the vice president, plan as I am. With you at the helm, I'll not be afraid of shipwreck. And then he ends with a quote in Italian from the poet Leopardi, which I had Jay's son-in-law, who was an Italian scholar, translate for me. Translates, and to sink, brackets, be shipwrecked in this sea is sweet.
You framed that.
After he died, I framed that and put it up on my wall, because I felt that was kind of his mandate to me, that he felt that I could keep things on an even keel and get them through. And I think, because during that period, we University of the South, which has inherited the copyrights of Tennessee Williams, and that went into effect when his sister Rose died. And then at a certain point, through the arcane workings of the U.S. copyright law, which I will not go into, an author does have a certain rights to renegotiate contracts. And there was a certain faction at the university that wanted to split up the rights and give the more lucrative paperback rights to, a Random House or a this or, or a Penguin or something. What enabled us to do this expansive program of publishing early plays and unpublished one-acts and this and that and the other thing was that the earnings from Tennessee's own work subsidize these others that are at best break-even propositions. And they said, well, you can continue to do the other things and and we said, no, that's not how it works. But there were some hard-headed business types. And finally, Barbara and I sat down with the then chancellor of the university and, tried to explain to him the relationship between, and that Tennessee always wanted.
He was loyal to James, right?
And he said very early on, and I always want my shy intrusions into the world of literature to be with New Directions, which is, I think, is a very sweet, very Tennessee phrase.
Very genteel.
Very genteel. And we made at least enough of an impression that he went back and talked to some of the literary people. And a guy at the university named Wyatt Prunty, who had been running the Sewanee Writers Conference, which they started down there with when they started to get the first Tennessee money. Tennessee's express wish was that they'd be used to promote creative writing. And so they started the Sewanee Writers Conference, to which they give scholarships, so that they're using his money to help young writers. Prunty convinced the chancellor. He says, what you need to sort this out is a really good literary agent. And Georges Borchardt...
Originally French.
Yes, he's been a New York literary agent for years and years and years, and extremely highly respected. I had gone down to talk about Tennessee at the Writers' Conference, and he goes down every summer and talks about agents and what agents do, etc. And so Prunty suggested that Borchardt, and they talked to Borchardt, and he says, if you split these up, the rights up, New Directions is no longer going to have the money to do all these things and publish these things.
To offset the cost.
To offset the cost, and plus which the publisher who takes on isn't going to do any of those.
No, they just want the money.
They just want the money. So we had to pony up a lot of money, and I was able to put that deal together with Borchardt, figure out a way that New Directions could pay out a big advance, but again, it's an advance. We knew we were going to get the money all back because Tennessee was going to earn it, because that's one you could count on to keep bringing in the money. So it was just a matter of structuring.
Because they'd be buying so many of the books.
Yeah, right. Because and that we knew from what we got from Tennessee Williams that it was just a matter of structuring it in a time so that money coming in here would pay so that you made a ladder to work it out. So that was the kind of thing that I provided a bridge.
And now the company is...
and now they're doing extremely well. This is just, at the last board meeting, we got this, look how many pages that is. This is what the publicity outreach, this is prizes that authors have won and big reviews and everything. And for a little company like New Directions, that's pretty impressive.
Wow, yeah. Goes on forever.
Yeah. And so they've really gotten some good there are two young women who do the publicity.
Yeah.
As I say, they're kind of split between people who've been there a long time and they have some new young people who are just doing really, really well. Between these things like the art book kind of things and repackaging, Ferlinghetti's greatest hits.
It just sounds very smart what they're doing.
Yes.
Now they're still independent, right?
They're still independent.
That's the best part.
And intending to remain so. Thank you very much.
They're
doing Indonesian writers and Japanese and, a lot of Spaniards. Hector Villamatos, Cesar Ira from Argentina, some wonderful new poets.
Then just finally, if you could talk about how you feel about James Laughlin and what impact he had on your life.
Well, James Laughlin, first of all, in terms of the impact on me, he gave me a career that I never dreamed I would have. I grew up in a rural town in Pennsylvania. I don't think when I was in high school I was madly in love with literature, but I thought basically the only way you could do anything was to teach, and I didn't want to teach high school, so then when I got to college, I said, well, I can be a college teacher, and that can be, and then I didn't even know you could have a career in publishing. And so when this serendipitously, a whole new world of a way to interact with literature that met and exceeded all of my dreams of an impact that I could have on literature. This is one of my happiest memories, doing a deal in literature. In the early 80s, a friend and I went to China, when China was just opening up, and we decided the two of us were going to have a girlfriend. I was between marriages, have a great adventure. And because of that trip, I started getting interested in Chinese, literature who was writing. And I heard about the poet Bei Dao. And he was just somebody who's on my radar screen, and I started to hear a little bit more about him. And then, and this is, something like 88 maybe, and Elliot Weinberger, he's an essayist that New Directions has published. He translated Octavio Paz, but he's also a wonderful essayist. But he knows a lot of literary contacts. And he had come across this young man, David Hinton, who was translating ancient Chinese poetry. And it had been sitting in the then editor-in-chief's office, and it had been sitting there. And he called me up and he said, Peggy, I really want this to be looked at, and I know, and I don't want him to wait in turn, and I think you'll like it, or whatever. So I read these translations of Du Fu, ancient Chinese poet. And I was really bowled over. I thought they were terrific. Then a guy I had been corresponding with in England, Peter J., ran the Anvil Press Poetry. They published almost exclusively poetry in the UK. And we've been corresponding. And one of the things is he was going to publish Bei Dao's poetry, a selection called The August Sleepwalker. And he was coming to the States. And I said, I really, really want to read this selection of Bei Dao's that you're doing. And he got here, and I had just finished reading the Hinton. And he came into the office and he said, well, here's the Bei Dao. Okay. I said, I really want you to look at this because I know you are interested in Chinese poetry. This is ancient Chinese poetry, but this is really a new take on the way to translate it. And he says, okay, I'll take it home and read it overnight. If you'll read that overnight. We both took them home. We read them overnight. We came back and we says, I'll take yours if you'll take mine. And so that was one of my happiest deals. And so we did about 7 or 8 of these ancient Chinese poetries. And just a year or so ago, Hinton was awarded the Thornton Wilder Translation Prize for Lifetime Achievement by the American Academy of Arts and Letters for his translation from the Chinese. And of course, Bei Dao is kind of the premier dissident poet of China, and we published 5 or 6 poetry books, and this is a new memoir that has just come out this past year. Just to say that was the career that James Laughlin gave me. James Laughlin, as I said, he seduced you into carrying on to his mission. That man broke my heart every day because I thought he was so sweet and so encouraging to me and to his authors, and he wrote all these wonderful letters encouraging people. And if you read the letters volume, his encouragement of Tennessee over the years is just, he was Tennessee's lifeline time and time again. But Jay was just the unhappiest man I have ever known. He was after this elusive something that he couldn't quite grasp. With regards to the women in his life, John Hawkes was a New Directions novelist, and John was married to Sophie, and John and Sophie were absolutely devoted to each other. And given John's lurid novels, this seems counterintuitive, but they were, and I don't think that he ever fooled around with anybody. And Jay just once talked to me so longingly about wanting to have the kind of relationship that John and Sophie had. And he just seemed to split. You were either a very, a competent whatever, or you were some kind of, he called them apsaras, these Hindu demigoddesses who float muse-like in front of you. But he could never get that together. Combination. Yeah. And he longed to write wonderful poetry. He felt he had to substitute publishing because he could never measure up to all these other people. So that
his own harshest critic.
He was his own harshest critic, and as I say, he did so much for so many people, things that you don't know. Kenneth Rexroth was very, very ill the last 10 years of his life. Didn't want to go to the hospital or in home. Jay paid for his medical expenses so that he could stay at home. And this was not New Directions paying for it. This was just Jay as an individual. And I think that there were lots more things like of that kind of thing that I don't know about. And and the problems with his his sons and the bipolar and just all of these things. He did valiantly keep at it and kept working and was writing. In the last decade of his life, he published something like 5 or 6 books of poetry. Like he couldn't get it out fast enough, and he wanted to get it. There was something he wanted to say. He's not one of the great poets of the
certainly
20th.
One of the great publishers.
One of the great publishers. He's definitely one of the. He's right up there, very near the top of great publishers. But if you take out, I've told them at New Directions that they should get somebody who really understands his poetry to make a selection of about 100 pages or so, because his best poems do stand up to anybody's. They are really very, very fine. He was rich. He was movie star handsome when he was young. He was a very good poet and writer in general. And then he was a publisher with all of this great outreach. And he was a skiing impresario. He's, at the Alta ski out in Utah.
Yeah.
And I think people, there are 2 things that the responses are: they can't allow him to be that good in that many fields, or they think, well, he's spread himself too thin, he's a dilettante. And they don't realize the impact he has had on literature. And I hope that with my husband Ian McNiven's biography, literature is my beat. That's Jay using Poundian locution. He'll get the attention because he is that well-kept secret, and he shouldn't be, and people should realize the tremendous effect he has had. And when he died, I had 4 different women calling me who were still in love with him and had not a bad word to say about him. And he did have this incredible effect on people, and you wanted somehow to make it better, and you knew you couldn't. But he is a giant of a publisher, and I'll always be grateful that I wandered into New Directions that day, and he has given me so much.
Well, I'm grateful that you've taken the time to talk to me about your experience.
Well,
and about
my pleasure. This is kind of a lucky accident. So
I'm also pleased to see that you have found the happiness that Laughlin may not have found with Ian.
Thank you. Yes, that was another happy accident of fate when our former much-loved spouses died within a year of each other. We got together, and it was funny because years before that, I had gotten Ian when the New Directions trustees were meeting, and one of the things that Laughlin wanted done in his will was that he wanted a history of New Directions, and he always said, well, I want a history, but leave me out of it. I mean, really, now come on, Jay. So we said, what is really needed is a good biography by a good biographer that will incorporate the history of New Directions. And I said, you know, my friend Ian McNiven, whom I'd known that by that time for 20 years, biography of Lawrence Durrell has just been published, and it was named a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and all of that. And I gave it to Laughlin's daughter to read, and I said, you know, Durrell had multiple women in his life and various things, but it's all handled with tact. You know, he's not sugarcoating or denying, but it's not sensational. She read it, and she said, oh, he writes so well, and you're right. And we don't want, we the family we don't want anything left out, but we do want, you know, it to be handled
tastefully,
with respect, you know. And Ian was at that point never going to write another biography because they are indeed all-consuming.
Yes, yeah.
But he decided the cast of characters was just too inviting, and so he started, and then.
Well, it's a great book too.
Yeah.
It's especially if you're a bibliophile. It's a great read.
Yes,
Yeah.
and tell people that.
Well, just have, but we'll continue to. And I'll also tell people that you are the editor, along with Thomas Keith, of The Luck of Friendship, the letters of Tennessee Williams.
Yes, and Thomas
and
really,
James
it was a total joint effort on that. We labored on that for many years, but it was a real total collaboration.
Great. It was published by Norton.
Published by Norton.
Thanks again.
Thank you.